I am not making a judgment call on who is the best team. I'm making a judgment call on what is right, what is fair, what was earned. Okay. So if you could only select one team for 1996, I think that the voters got it right that Florida would be the national champion. Why? Because they got a rematch with the team that beat them and they whipped them. It was 52-20. I would have to go look that game up. It's obviously been 30 years since I watched the game. I believe it was a pretty close game. Florida State actually led this game 17-14. No, 24-17. 24-17 Florida at the break. So a one-score lead. And then they moved out from there. Okay. But they dominated the second half, clearly. I'm not trying to make any kind of case that it was a close game by any stretch. But to me, there is a difference between games that finish at 52-20 that were, let's say, 28-0 at half versus ones that were 24-17 at half. But still, not close. And that's what we had there. So this is the way I size up this season. And this is a tricky one. It's easy just to go along with the AP and say, yeah, Florida's won a national championship. I was about to say Florida State. Florida won a national championship because they avenged their loss. I don't know necessarily if that should be the criteria for winning a national championship. This one's a tough one for me to call. I may have to take this one offline and report back on this one because this may take some thought because I want to stay consistent from season to season. And this is either a call for Florida to say they avenged their loss, they win the national championship. However, what's the case for Florida State? Well, the case for Florida State is that they played 2 games against Florida and they split. And the last I checked, we did not judge and evaluate football games based on the score, meaning if 2 teams play and they split the games, we're not going to go into this whole, well, you beat them by 32, but you beat them by 4. Therefore, the 32 is better than the 4. We don't get into score comparisons. Florida and Florida State both went 11-1. Actually, I believe Florida played the extra game in the SEC championship game. So Florida went 12-1 and Florida State went 11-1. That might be my deciding factor right there. Because otherwise, then you got to throw Ohio State back into the mix and say they win a national championship too. If you're going to give or award Florida State the national championship with Florida because they split, then Ohio State played neither of those 2 teams, and they went 11-1 as well. Now, Arizona State, I would knock out because they would be the one team involved that did have a head-to-head, and they lost to Ohio State. So Arizona State gets eliminated based on the head-to-head against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. But the other 3, and I think this is where people's thought process gets a bit skewed by bowl games. Bowl games are not playoff games. So this is not like you could make an argument in 2024 that Oregon should be the national champion because they had the best record. No. There's a playoff system. So you earn your way to the playoff, and then everybody goes to 0-0. There's a clean slate. Everybody plays in the playoff, and then whoever wins the playoff. That was not the case back then. It was just another data point. So I also don't want to be inconsistent in awarding Florida a solo national championship because they played in a conference championship game, because we did not do that elsewhere and say, you know what, you didn't play in a conference championship game. Your 11-1 is not as good as the 12-1. Although that is the case. Florida beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. That Alabama team was pretty good. I think they went 10-3, 10-2. Well, they played in the championship game. I think they went 10-3. They beat Michigan in the Outback Bowl, Citrus Bowl. If we're going to be consistent with awarding record, so if the record's the same and the level of conference and the schedule is the same, because we're going to see an example coming up with Texas A&M where don't think we can pull the trigger on them winning a national championship because the Southwest Conference was phenomenal for decades, but got so bad the final 4 or 5 years that you really played no one. Shoot, Texas Tech won the Southwest Conference the final year, I think it was, and played USC in the Cotton Bowl, got steamrolled. They were like 6-5. The Southwest Conference for the final 4 or 5 years could barely get a team ranked, let alone a team in the top 10. So we've got a Texas A&M year that they went into postseason play against Notre Dame with no losses and a tie, and you could argue that they should have been playing in the BCS champion or the national championship game. There was no BCS championship game, that they should have been paired up against number one, but they did not play anyone. We don't have that issue here. If anyone played the worst schedule, it would have been Florida State because they played in the ACC. But I got to think that Florida State in 1996 was playing a heck of a non-conference schedule. Well, it's fine that they put the ranking at time of kickoff, but I would like it if they put the final ranking there. So according to this, because, NC State could have finished number 10 in the country, they didn't. And North Carolina, number 11 at time of kickoff, could have been 4-7. So Florida State played number 11, North Carolina. They won by 13. They played number 6, Miami. They won by 18. They played number 14, Virginia. And I can guarantee you, Virginia did not finish number 14 in 1996. And they won that game by 7. Let's see, Virginia went, we'll find that in a sec. Virginia went 7-5. There you go. North Carolina, who was number 11, went 10-2. Okay. Mac Brown. Florida State played number 25, Southern Miss. They won by 40. And then again, they beat number 1, Florida by 3. Then they lost to number 3, Florida by 32. They beat old Peyton Manning in Tennessee. I remember that game, 35-29. I don't think it was that close at Neyland Stadium when Tennessee was number 2, and Tennessee finished like in the top 5 in the country. They beat number 12, LSU, by 43. They beat Auburn, number 16, by 41. They beat Georgia by 40. Now, that was not a great Georgia team. That Georgia team finished 5-6. They lost that game to Florida State. They beat Alabama, who was number 11, and finished about that same spot, 45-30. And then they avenged the loss to Florida State. And then we throw Ohio State in here. So again, we're either going to award Florida a solo national championship for winning the SEC in a conference championship game and avenging their loss by 32 points, or we're going to consider these 3 teams equal because they all had 1 loss, and Florida State split, and Ohio State was not involved. We've got Ohio State beat a really good Notre Dame team by 13. They beat number 4 Penn State by 31. They beat number 20 Iowa by 12. Then they lost to Michigan. That obviously was what cost them the national championship. Then they beat the number 2 team in the country, Arizona State, in the Rose Bowl. And I don't know if any of those other teams, Penn State finished 11-2. They beat them by 31 points. They beat Iowa, who finished 9-3 by 12. So those were their two best wins, in addition to Notre Dame, who finished 9-3 and in the top 10. So they had 4 extremely strong wins along with the Rose Bowl. Our buddy Chris brings up a good point. BYU was 14-1. However, the issue here is, again, my criteria starts with record. Are the records the same? Basically the same. But next has to come conference and schedule. And BYU did not play in a major conference. So had BYU gone undefeated, then we would be making the argument for BYU to share a national championship. BYU lost to Washington by 12. BYU beat Texas A&M, number 13 at time of kickoff, by 4. And Wyoming in the WAC championship game in overtime, they beat Kansas State by 4. So they went the entire conference season and did not play a ranked team. How good was Washington that year? 1996, Washington was a pretty good team. 9-3. Lost to Colorado in the Holiday Bowl. Lost to Notre Dame. Lost to Arizona State. So certainly BYU lost to a competent team for sure in a pretty close game on the road. And then, Texas A&M in 1996 finished 6-6. So they were not the number 13 team in the country. Do we have a common opponent in here? Yes, Arizona State would be a common opponent between BYU and Ohio State. So BYU lost to Arizona State by 3, I believe, and Ohio State beat Arizona State by 3. Got to call this one an Ohio State, to be precisely in order, not that it matters if everyone shares a national championship, but Florida State, Ohio State, 1996.